I said this, I forget to whom or into what context, but if there's one retro YCS a year, even just one, I would probably give up modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I can only likely go to one YCS plus nationals every year as is. And basically just focus on modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Around nationals.
I would fucking love that.
That'd be really cool.
I would just give up modern Yu-Gi-Oh!
I would play. That would bring me back to Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm not even gonna lie.
I would go to the local retro tournaments every week instead, because it's more fun, it's more enjoyable. And I would just forego modern Yu-Gi-Oh!
If at the start of every year,
event a year,
if at the start of every year, Konami said, okay, in let's say June or July, right? The time pretty much after nationals, we're all kind of not doing anything anyway. There's no events. After nationals, there's going to be a 2009 nationals format YCS. Like they tell you in January exactly what the format's going to be, so that everyone has the same amount of time to test for it. In between, like let's say the format gets stale in January, because like at this point we're not getting a new pack like we were supposed to get before Pasadena, so the format's going to stay Sword Soul, Bird Up, and those are pretty much like the decks right now. Like I'm not even going to go into all the other decks that are possible to play. Those are the two decks. There's a lot. You can play anything right now. You can pretty much kill your opponent turn one, but for the most part, it's going to be Sword Soul and Bird Up going into Pasadena, and probably after Pasadena, since we're not getting anything changing, and assuming no ban list. So people get bored.
We have a ban list right after Pasadena. 17th is the earliest possible day.
Yeah, we'll see. Because the ban lists haven't been very real lately. I don't know if you noticed that part, but they just have not. The last one didn't do anything. Like they put even a 1 for Drytron. Like that didn't do a single thing to that deck. Like it didn't do a single thing.
It helped the deck actually.
Yeah, in a weird way, right? And but not to get sidetracked. The point is that we get bored of the current format all the time, but we can't do anything about it. What are you going to do? Play another game? Because Yu-Gi-Oh has only supported one format in history. It's always supported advanced format. Traditional has been a meme. So if they were like, hey, 2009 Nationals is going to be the YCS this year, in between those weird moments where you're just, I'm tired of playing Sword Soul, you'd be like, let's whip out our Savo Dad decks. Let's whip out our Cat decks. Let's whip out our Lifespan decks. That would be so fun, and I would actually play Yu-Gi-Oh again.
So that's the best case scenario. It's
that's
the
best
most likely
case
scenario, but if they did it right, one of the problems is they don't have the events because of COVID to likely gather the data of interest by running these at the side events of YCSs that are, maybe they will do this at the next two YCSs. That would surprise me, but it would be sweet. I feel like they should tell us ahead of time so we can bring the cards, but let's just say for the sake of discussion, they actually announce this ahead of time as they should. They get to see and they're like, oh wow, we just had 300 people in a YCS that's capped just by people only going to the YCS to play, not alone. Like you can't just walk in the door because of the restrictions. And we just had 300-400 people sign up for a side event.
I think that they need you. You need to be on some kind of committee, Joe. I feel like you would be a great. People aren't really happy with the current Joe in office, but I think you'd be a great Joe in office for Yu-Gi-Oh. Like I think you do a really good job on the committee because you seem to have a really good understanding of how things should be. Like, tell us in advance so we bring the cards. That's smart. It's common sense. Though. It's obvious, but listen.
It is obvious that Konami has made some decisions.
Yes, they've had a history of dropping balls. So you need someone who's kind of like, you were a player, for a long time. You have kind of like this idea of how things should be structured because you're also a teacher. I think that skill translates into Yu-Gi-Oh. I think that the way you speak about how things should be and how organized you are is actually a skill from your teaching life it translates. It helps. It helps.
Also, one event a year shouldn't be that hard to set up for fucking Konami. Like it's,
So it's really, because it's always a business.
Yes, at the end of the day.
The question is, if they ran a retro YCS, but also, let's say, an extravaganza level Sunday modern event, would the amount of money they earn be sufficient? Because you can't book the Philly Convention Center and only get 400 retro players.
That's true.
Because
that shit is very expensive. It's so expensive.
Exactly. You need to get 1,800.
You do.
Could Retro Yu-Gi-Oh get to the point where an equivalent amount of people would show up to play? And in addition to that, could Konami create product to drive sales in relation to Retro Yu-Gi-Oh? Because yes, the player quantity is part of it, but they also need to be selling the products for people to go to those events.
Yep.
I think there is a universe. I think there is a universe. There's someone that commented on one of my YouTube videos that said, if there was one retro YCS a year and I actually had the chance of having YCS champion attached to my name, I would fly from England.
Yeah.
Yes.
That also.
I think how many old school players who do not currently travel, have no plans on traveling, would build a deck and go to one of these events. I think you would actually have a decent foundation just off the bat. Could then content creators like Pack, for example, and others build up interest, and then could the local scene actually get going? And honestly, in my locals yesterday, people were playing Edison. People were trading. People like, I saw in a trade, how much do you value this ultimate Ring of Destruction? People were trading for, talking about ideas. There were a lot of retro Yu-Gi-Oh discussion in my locals yesterday. If that's a blip in the radar, then this won't go anywhere. But if we see locals of an equivalent size between modern and retro, and then we can translate that through content creation and actually get interest, and Konami looks at it and says, wow, we could actually sufficiently fill the Philly Convention Center or whatever convention center you want with a retro event and make the same amount of money we would. And in addition to that, we can start to gear products in a way, right? You put, Ultimate Rare Metamorphosis or something into a pack, and that could be a driving force, right? Maybe
that
some
will
of
be a
these
driving
side
force.
sets.
Yeah, no,
right?
I get what you're saying, Joe. I mean, it makes sense from a business standpoint. If they're going to do this type of thing, Magic does it already. I think that this is the natural evolution of Yu-Gi-Oh! Now that we're talking about it more, like the more it's coming out verbally, I'm starting to realize that this is Yu-Gi-Oh!'s natural evolution to me, is to actually support more than one format like Magic does. Magic is years and years ahead of Yu-Gi-Oh!, right? Like just how long it's been out. It's also like now it's definitely like just a bigger game, honestly, like just a bigger game. And I think that finally getting the support for these old formats is not only the natural evolution, but there's money to be made from a business standpoint. And even if at first you do have to kind of lose a little bit of money, like that's just R&D, right? Like that's just, businesses have to do that anyway. Like Konami has to do that anyway. You're going to have R&D costs. You're going to have like, oh, we don't know how this actually will perform. We're going to do a test of it in 2022. Do the one YCS, see if we get 400 or if we get 1800. And depending on how that goes, and you start to tweak things. Maybe you only got 400 for a reason. Maybe because of COVID. Maybe because people couldn't travel as much or stuff like that. Or maybe you say, you know what? We can figure out a way to make this better, and we'll create a pack like M17, for example, that literally reprints cards from that format so that people can play it. And in a rarity that makes people who don't even care about the format, but they still want the collector, like the Ultimate Metamorphosis, for example, like you brought up.
Starlight Metamorphosis. Yeah, so I think there is a pathway where this can happen, and it's profitable and it makes sense, and all of that. I think it's a little bit difficult because there's the work with the erratas and the rulings and that you do need that database.
Yeah.
And our request is a little bit different from what Magic has going on. The natural rotation of sets make it such that you don't actually have to tweak all that much. You basically just have to pick a certain pinpoint in time and then say these sets are legal. We actually want to play a timestamp in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because legacy and vintage sets, or legacy and vintage in Magic and even modern and all of those, they get affected by new card release, right? Our 2009 format is not going to be affected by a card printed in 2022. In Magic, a card printed in 2022 or 2021 is going to affect vintage and legacy and all of those old formats. I'm looking at you, Ragavan, right? So it's a little bit of a different universe. It requires a little bit more work. You have to actually say we're going to play old rulings and old erratas, but it is doable.
Yep.
And
R&D.
especially if you only support it, I get it. If you don't want to put 20 years and 50 different formats to that level of work, I understand if you don't actually have the manpower to actually do that. But if you pick a few segmented formats and say, we're going to devote 6 months to this is our database, and then you can add to it over time. This doesn't have to be a universe where we can look at this database
Magic
and see
the Gathering
every format and every ruling and every single thing ever in the history of the game.
Magic the Gathering wasn't built overnight. That's for sure.
That's the thing. Let's live in dreamland, and let's say things work out. Let's say they do it once a year, right? One event a year. If they announce the event 6 months ahead of time or whatever, that's plenty of time for everybody to start figuring out the rulings, figuring out how everything works before the event comes up. Another thing they can do in terms of gaining interest, prize cards, something that could be cool. Let's say the format is, let's say the format is 2010 Gravekeepers, the Atlanta YCS, the Frazier one, right? Let's say, okay, we're going to do this format. The prize card for that event could be a new art of a Gravekeeper card, right? Like if they do each format a YCS, you can make the prize card of the event new art for this card, this boss card of this deck that won.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely do stuff like that.
I don't really think the prize card drives all that much. I don't know about you, but
it does now because they're worth a lot of money now. I don't know. So when we played,
I guess that's true.
When we played, they were not worth really anything. But
we
now,
played for intrinsic motivation.
We really did.
Yeah.
We played because we loved the game. But now people could be argued that they play for the actual prize. For example, they just gave out Ultra Dark Lords recently for I think a remote YCS or something like that. They gave the winner ultra rare Dark Lords, the same prize card that I won in 2010. They gave it to someone else. It is now worth tens of thousands of dollars. Like that prize card, those prize cards, I should say, is the only triple, but it's worth tens of thousands of dollars now. It's no longer when I sold it.
If they make
I might have gotten a very little bit.
A new art exclusive Dark Magician, that shit's people are gonna be like, they're gonna want that shit. They're gonna want it.
Yeah, that'll bring people out. I mean, if there's money incentive definitely gets people. It definitely motivates a lot of Magic players. But you need your casuals as well. You know, you always, no matter what, you're not going to be able to run a scene on just competitive players. Unfortunately, you need the people who are just they're not going to win the tournament. They kind of know that they're not going to win, but they just kind of show up because they like to play the old format. You need those people too.
I think there are casual players that might not travel, but if they live in the area,
yeah. They will go.
You could have a person that say like, "Oh, this is Yu-Gi-Oh! The way I grew up. I'll go play."
I would go for sure. I wouldn't travel. Like Frazier saying he would travel. I wouldn't travel.
I would travel.
I wouldn't travel.
Hey guys, if you like this clip, we have full video versions of our podcast episodes available on the IMNerd Patreon, as well as exclusive content.
If you'd like to listen to our full podcast episodes or find us on any other social media platforms, you can do so by clicking the link tree below.